What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Rev University. Bruce, thank you so much for that incredible workshop. I would agree. I honestly really enjoy working from home. I have so much time to stay focused and get work done. So I've really enjoyed it. But I'm really excited today because we are going to be joined by Glen Mella. He is the CEO and co-founder of Axcend. And his career is super interesting. So I'm excited for us to talk a little bit about it. He's been through quite a few situations like we're in now throughout his career. From 1993 until now, he's been a part of 2 IPOs and 4 acquisitions. And he was the president of a super successful smart home company called Control4. And he has 15 years working with late growth companies under his belt and has raised over 200 million in venture capital and private equity. So we are very excited to welcome Glen Mella to the conversation. Glen, how are you?
Hey, Bree, good to see you. Hi, everyone.
Good to see you. Good.
So I like you, enjoyed what we just learned from Bruce, although it cracked me up that one of the things people love about working from home is no distractions. I'm thinking they don't have kids or dogs, but anyway, I would rather be sitting on a sofa with you at Rev Road today, but here we are.
Here we are. I would agree with that. The personal connection and the human interaction has been hard working from home, but it has been good in many other ways. Glen, I want to kick it off talking about kind of what's going on in the world right now and how entrepreneurship can be difficult in general, but right now it's become very difficult. And what was the most challenging obstacle that you faced during your entrepreneurial years?
Yeah, so it really is an interesting time to ask that question and have that conversation. And what I wanted to do for the group today was try to put it in a little bit of context. Not that I'm some wise sage about it, because there are lots of very real challenges today and a lot of unexpected situations that we're all facing. But it is helpful, since I actually started my postgraduate school career in the late 80s, to just put this in a little bit of historical context. So if I can, I'm going to just screen share for just a second here and show a little exhibit that the group might find interesting. This is, can you see that chart? Just let me know.
Yes.
Okay, so this is actually a list of all of the post-World War II recessions in the United States. I've heard so much in the last couple of weeks about, oh my gosh, this is unprecedented. It's the end of the world as we know it. How's there ever going to be any more fundraising? The IPO market is completely decimated. And while for sure, there are aspects of the current situation that are unprecedented, just some historical context is helpful. I actually graduated from college in the middle in 1982 from what was tied for the longest post-World War II recession. We had over 10% unemployment then. And the first home I bought, my mortgage interest rate was 15%. It wasn't uncommon to get homes with 18%. So then there are people that are probably listening today that lived through the first dot-com bubble burst in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then in 2008, 2009, we had what was called the subprime mortgage meltdown and another significant recession in our country. And so for those who have been, whether in large companies or small companies, these have also provided some interesting challenges to navigate through. One of the metrics that everybody's kind of freaked out about currently as well is, can you see my other tab that I just brought up? Okay, gross domestic product. So you go, oh, all the gains from last year were lost just in the first quarter of this year. And that's true if you're just looking at this snapshot. But if you go back and look at a 5-year view, you see a different picture. Or a 10-year view, you see, oh my gosh, the increases in our economy and the output that all the products, all the goods and services have delivered has been incredible. You can actually run this graph out all the way during my lifetime and see what that looks like. Another metric that's helpful for people or that they track is what's going on with the different stock markets. And this happens to be the NASDAQ because it's where a lot of the tech companies are traded. Again, you look at what just happened in the last couple of months and, oh my gosh, it looks like the Grand Canyon or worse, and it's terrible until you take a distanced view and go, oh yeah, well, what about the last 5 years? Or what about since they even started tracking graphs like this and look at the incredible wealth that has been returned to investors and the growth of companies. So I guess you can play with all kinds of statistics and things like that, but the point is just to try to think about today in the context of economies expand and contract. And there've been a lot of smart people in the financial markets that for the last couple of years have been waiting for this, what was a 9, 10, 11-year bull market to finally have some kind of correction. Of course, nobody wanted it to be brought on by a horrific disease or global pandemic. But the headline for me is that in some respects, we've been through a lot of these financial challenges before as a global and as a US economy. And so don't freak out. This too is going to pass.
I love that. And I love your wisdom and the experience that you have, that you've lived through so many recessions and gone through those up and downs of them. So for our new business owners who have not had the same experience as you, what advice do you have for them during this pandemic?
Yeah. Well, sometimes when you're starting a business or an early business owner, it can feel pretty lonely. It can feel like you're in a seat all by yourself, even though you know that there's things that go on both inside your company and outside in the economy that can impact your success. There are times where you think, man, it was pretty good when I was working with a big company and I had a team and I had a lot of people around me to share the risk and help think through problems. I would say the first thing, and it really just has to do with our own minds and our attitudes, is where a lot of people see fear and they see panic and chaos. There's another kind of mindset that does kind of lean forward or lean in and see opportunity. For sure, they see challenge, but they see opportunity. So could I just go through a couple of thoughts that I have about that? First is, I think for young business owners, the main thing you have to do is always work on keeping the tank full. And by that, I mean, cash is king in just about any early stage company. Learning about the various options for fundraising and asking everybody you can think of for help is super important. I think all young entrepreneurs that ultimately become successful, they build a network of, whether it's venture capitalists or angels, people who like early stage investment risk. And then those young business entrepreneurs learn pretty quickly that to care more about runway and having enough cash to fuel their great business or product idea than they care about dilution. And so with everybody, the best advice I'd give is focus very much on preservation of capital and getting the positive cash flow as quickly as you can. Now, when things go so upside down like they do in the current market, that's a lot easier said than done. There've been a number of discussions and panels that I've listened to and observed in the last couple of weeks. Dave Groh of Lucid participated in a Silicon Slopes discussion about a week ago. And he said that in the current environment, he's learned to become the ultimate scenario planner. And I think that's a great concept to strive as business leaders to really be more nimble and with that more humble perhaps than we're used to being, scrutinizing and monitoring very, very carefully, literally on a daily basis, what's happening and being in a position to try to react quickly. For all of us, I think the recent changes have forced us, and some of the things that Bruce was talking about, focusing on development, but have encouraged us or forced us to become really skilled at the way we manage, the way we plan, the way we lead in our organizations, the way we do selling, the way we deliver and execute, all those things in kind of this new world. I don't think any of us plan to be as adept with Google Meet and Zoom and the other tools that that we've all learned to do recently. But that new normal, or whatever you want to call it, there's some aspects of it that were already in place, right? We've been for a couple of decades transitioning from an industrial economy to an information economy. I noticed this morning the CEO of Walmart quoted Doug McMillon. He said, "This is just speeding up the significant change the retail industry was already undergoing." And so again, while it came up really abruptly and really fast, um, the things that it's forcing companies to do actually become healthy in the long run for us. And then maybe my final piece of advice to everybody is get in the habit of over communicating with all your stakeholders, right? With your employees or team members, with your investors, with customers, and people that are relevant and important influences in your business. This is not a time to be absent or go dark or adopt the fetal position. This is a time, when we need to be very highly visible. Look at all of us in our emails. Just about every product that we use, from the airlines we travel on or the hotels we stay in, those CEOs have been messaging us and saying, "Hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what it means. Here's how we think about altering our business." In fact, I got a little chuckle, again, not to make light of a tough situation, but you know how long I've been waiting for the airlines to block middle seats? And now it's finally happened. So
Finally,
I'm
I'm with
super
you.
excited about that. Anyway, those are some thoughts.
I love that. I'm with you on the middle seats. The middle seats on airplanes are the worst. The worst. Glenn, you have spent some time as a mentor for some of our Rev Road portfolio companies. And so, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs about seeking mentors? And what advice would you give about building a strong mentor-mentee relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question and super important. Again, back to that feeling that sometimes it can feel like a lonely chair, especially when you're really facing a lot of headwinds or difficulty. I'd say the first thing is to always be on the lookout for, whether it's in a formal or informal capacity, for mentors that have complementary skills to yours, not just looking for someone, quote unquote, in your own image. It's not that helpful to just find yes people. But what we all really need are people who will be brutally honest with us, who will help us see things with objectivity that it's hard to do. Both the strength and weakness of entrepreneurs and founders is that we're so in love with our invention, with our product or our service, that we very quickly have a hard time holding on to that objectivity. And for people, even family members, to be your biggest critics. I have a lot of healthcare members of my family. I have a son who's a doctor and a son-in-law who's an oral surgeon, and two daughters who are nurses. And they take a lot of this business stuff with a grain of salt, and it's kind of no BS. It's unfiltered, and they say back to me, "Wow, that really doesn't make as much sense as you think it does." And so that is like the benefit that you can get from mentors, when people will share with you things that you need to hear, that sometimes your own partners or stakeholders at your company won't give you. And I would say, the second part of your question was, how do you build good relationships
Yeah.
with mentors? Be thoughtful about their time, and so plan your discussions. If you keep questions on the side when you have time with them, when you interact. And then I'd say the most important thing is, as you act on their feedback, on their input, and share just kind of your mini successes or your mini failures along the way, that is very motivating, because they feel like they're being listened to, and you can build a real strong relationship that way. Buying them a meal always helps, if I'm perfectly honest. But I think a lot of it just has to do with asking for genuine, candid advice and then acting on it.
Okay, I love that. I love that. Genuine advice. And I love that you mentioned acting on it and kind of showing them proof that you were listening, because I think that's important as well. I agree with that. So throughout your career, I'm sure with all of the market changes and everything, you've experienced your own up and downs. And so how has
Absolutely.
failure kind of shaped your journey?
Yeah. Well, most great leaders and people that I've, read books on and tried to learn some principles from have experienced some business failures along the way. That doesn't always mean a bankruptcy or a tanked company or something. That can mean, products that didn't launch with everything that all the fanfare expected. It can sometimes mean a really key project that didn't achieve its milestones or its goals. But in any case, I guess my first thought, Bree, is that failures in business don't define us. They can actually refine our knowledge and even our skills, but the great opportunity there is to learn from our mistakes and to learn from our failures, and at least not to repeat them. Try to make new mistakes and not just repeat your old ones. When you can sort of separate yourself, it almost reminds me of like when parents of young children are struggling with obedience issues, and they there's a little principle there, which is not that your child is bad, it's your child is wonderful, but your child made a bad choice or a poor choice. And it's not, as business people, it's not that we're failures. It's that the particular business that we're working on or the project that we're working on has some challenges, or the trajectory that it's headed is not on one that's going to succeed. A couple months ago, Amy Reese Anderson presented here at Rev Road, and I loved her quote. She said, "It will all be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end." And I think that's a terrific reminder. So, be objective, listen to others, especially, what you're learning from the market with, adoption of your product or with sales or whatever. And then to the degree that you can log those learnings, your failures through the space of your career, I think will prove to be a blessing rather than a curse.
That's beautiful. I love that you said failures don't define, they refine. I think that says a lot too. That says a lot about leadership, and the type of leader that it takes to accept failure and move forward through failure and come out of failure on the other side, right? And so I guess my next question would be, what advice do you give business owners when it comes to deciding company values? And as far as leaders specifically during a time like this, how are company values even more crucial?
Yeah. That's another thing that some have even said, that founders and CEOs, the only real important thing they do is manage culture in a company, because if you do that well, sort of all the other deliverables line up. Couple thoughts. Great leaders that I think have existed in life, in all aspects, including business, have been ones that understand that you lead and you define and you manage your culture, or it manages you. It gets a life of its own and it can run away from you. One definition of culture is how does the team interact when you, the founder, are not there? What goes on when you're not in the room or you're not present? And that's a requirement that we as leaders should invest the time and the energy to be absolutely certain that we know what our team thinks and what they feel and how they interact. I think probably the most important thing that we all have to do very early on is get over ourselves, be approachable. I just can't imagine a really, really aspirational culture in a young startup or growing company where, the person with the great ideas always has to remind everybody else that they're the smartest one in the room. And by so doing, it just sort of sucks all the oxygen out of the room. There is a fact, if I can screen share one more time.
Yeah.
There is a great culture statement that has impacted me. Sorry, let me make sure I can do this. And it was actually developed by Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks. And is that up on the screen now, Bree?
Yes.
Okay. So I just let everybody view that for a second rather than go through each piece of it. But obviously a culture statement like this, which lots of companies have, and I've developed some over the years, they're aspirational. They're not necessarily how you act or interact every day, but they're certainly what you articulate that you desire to be. And, cynicism versus optimism, limits versus opportunity, partisanship versus leadership, blame versus I own this or I'm responsible. So these are just some things. And, of all places, that's, what Howard Schultz some time ago put in front of many thousands of employees throughout the Starbucks organization and said, hey guys, this is what we aspire to. So I think that it is one of the important things that we have to do in leadership roles is recognize that we win or we lose, usually as a team, and therefore company culture is really key.
So as we start looking at and redefining company cultures, as many of them are probably shifting now due to the pandemic and all the changes that are happening, what are the 3 things business owners should really focus on during this time of transition?
Yeah, I mentioned, I think, 2 of the most important ones already at the top of the discussion, which are, when I say conserve cash, I mean, ultimately it's a lean mentality, which is, do I really need this now? And I found that companies that ultimately succeed, and many, many companies will have their stories. In fact, Darren, the CEO and founder of Rev Road, will remember well the lean years at Imagine Learning, where members of the leadership team had second mortgages on their home to fuel capital into the business. It was down to, less than the last $1 million. And while there was a great product and a great team and a great opportunity, there were still, those periods of time where the company had to be very, very careful in making its choices. And I had the pleasure of serving on that board for 6 years and being part of those decisions. So getting by with the people and the resources and the systems almost as long as you can until it just about breaks your back, and then upgrading to the next thing. So for instance, can I use spreadsheets as long as I can until I have to finally upgrade and get that fancy financial software? That's just maybe a silly little example, but doing things like that to preserve capital, I think, has got to be number one. Especially now, because the markets are impacted. Investors are going to be a lot more selective and conservative in the near term. And much of the dry powder capital, whether it's venture, private equity, even seed funds, they're propping up their existing portfolio companies and probably being really, really discerning or conservative on new investment. So that's why cash has to be king. And then number 2 would be that that sort of nimbleness or being the great scenario planner that Dave Groh mentioned. There's another video I just saw yesterday, Dennis Wood at Mercado Partners, using the volleyball analogy. He described having a ready stance. And I think that's probably apropos to all of us, because we think we have an idea of how industry is going to reopen here and how the country is going to try to get back to work, but there's yet going to be surprises and things that are unexpected. So the more we can be very, very lean and very nimble, the better. And the third one, and this, I hope what I'm trying to say comes across and as a serious point, but I think this is also a time for leaders as much as possible to create self-fulfilling prophecies and basically begin now making sure everybody that hears your voice believes in your amazing comeback and how at this time of challenge your company is not just going to survive, but it's actually going to get ahead. That it's clearly the case, Bree, and everybody listening, that in this economy there is going to be some sort of Darwinian outcomes where some weaker companies are going to fail. I was listening to a news show the other day, and some guy comes on and he says, yeah, yesterday we laid off 100% of our employees. And I thought, no, you cannot blame that on COVID-19. I'm sorry. That was already a struggling company if you had to lay off 100% of your employees at the beginning of this outbreak. And so I'm not, again, making light of the fact that there are real challenges and real issues. But I've also seen over now several decades the sheer force of will of very, very determined founders and executives. If you guys remember the old classic movie, Yul Brynner played the Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments, and he used to always say, "So let it be written, so let it be done." And it was just that very, very strong sense of, we can do this, we will do this, and we're going to come out stronger on the other side. So I think a third piece of advice would be trying to keep that mentality as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that. So the number one piece of advice is cash is king, making sure you have your money in line, spending it wisely, right? So what about raising money? It's been kind of topic of conversation that like money's gone or all fundraising has paused. What advice would you give to startups who are in those fundraising phases?
Right. When we were talking about mentors, and at the very beginning, I was suggesting that, if you currently are in a situation where the runway is very, very uncertain, you just don't know if you have enough capital around the table today to quote unquote go the distance or get to cash flow positive, then this is the time you should be on a daily basis asking for help. And, the best case scenario is, and it's going to happen over time. This is not usually people in their first gig, just out of school or their first entrepreneurial experience. But over time, what really can happen is you can build a network of very loyal and committed investors at all stages of the funding continuum, from angel investors who look for this kind of risk, asset class, to VCs and private equity firms who just know you by reputation. Perhaps they've had success with you already. You've returned positive returns to the shareholders, and they'll be excited to invest behind you or with you in the future. For me, I've learned that not all capital is created equal. That investment money comes in all shapes and sizes, and so what we look for, of course, is people who want to be collaborative, who want to be helpful, who enjoy the process of the uncertainties. Now, like I said, there's a lot of retrenchment going on right now where people are shoring up investments they've already made, but there's still a lot of capital available, and smart money at all stages of the continuum have dry powder. They've been saving for a rainy day, so to speak. Again, I think the last 8 weeks was very stark, took a lot of people by dramatic surprise. But you talk to most sophisticated people, and they are looking for good investments. In fact, when markets are in decline and industries are consolidated, it sometimes fuels M&A activity and fuels investment activity. So we got to get through crisis mode. In fact, I just got confirmation of our SBA payroll protection plan loan, as I'm sure others on the call today are doing, and taking advantage of some resources and some help that's available. But one of the advantages of ecosystems like within Rev Road and of course others is that you can ask for help. You don't have to just sit here and pull your hair out on your own.
So there is help out there, and there is still capital out there.
There's capital.
Okay, good to know. Glenn, you are quite involved with Rev Road as an investor. What has been rewarding about that experience?
Wow, a lot of things. Darren Hill and I go back, 13 plus years, as I mentioned at Imagine Learning, and I was a part of the discussions with the team of founders about starting a new Utah Valley-based startup accelerator with a different approach, a different model, one of being much more deeply involved with our portfolio companies. And I was excited to be one of the initial investors, and I'm still very excited about that. I've also made direct investments into some of the companies, and I think there's incredible startup DNA right here. There's a lot of bright and energized and committed people, both inside the team at Rev Road as well as the portfolio companies. And again, I wish we were gathered like most of the Thursdays where you do review together. Anybody that walks in that room and in that building can tell, they can feel it, and they can tell that there's something really special that goes on here. But I think fundamentally, the reason I like it is a different model than many of the both incubators or accelerators in technology that have existed, that have really just been around getting started, a couple of lectures from some successful operators or entrepreneurs, and then getting you ready to go raise money, what we call demo days. That's been the primary value add. And I would say what I've liked about Rev Road's model has been going much deeper in legal and financial and strategy and sales help and all the things. So it's an extraordinary value proposition. You know, we have 30 plus companies now that in one way or another are part of that and are experiencing it. But that's what keeps me jazzed about, you know, any time and energy that I can play a small role in, I enjoy.
Yeah. I know this question wasn't really one that we talked about, but I would love to hear a little bit more of your thought process of, or your thoughts around Rev Road structure and the different services that we provide to entrepreneurs and the value that comes with that, as opposed to, say, a different option for startup support.
Yeah. Well, I think the fundamental difference is we look for longer term, deeper engagement. Really more being integral parts of the teams, as opposed to we're just giving you some resource from the side and then cheering you on. I think that's fundamentally the difference. And maybe I don't know a statistic yet on this. Darren or Bart or Joel or somebody might know, but I think, you know, we're going to kind of be tightly integrated for as long as 2 years with many of the companies that invited us in to be part of and own us, you know, a substantial part of the cap table to make it meaningful on both sides of the equation. You know, there is a vetting process and an application process as part of that, but you know, we believe deeply in the potential of all the companies that participate, and I'm just getting to know many of them. Because I also have a full-time gig that I'm involved with. But I think for not only Utah County, but the state and even the industry in general, this is pretty special. And we're going to create a lot of nicely curated companies that are going to be forces in the coming months.
Well, I'm excited about it, and I'm glad that you're excited about it. I agree with you. I think Rev Road is incredible. Going back to some topics about the pandemic, right now, you've mentioned that right now can be an incredible opportunity to be an entrepreneur. Can you speak a little bit more about what opportunities you see?
Well, everything right now has shifted over, as we've all already commented and experienced, to what are the kinds of industries and businesses that, you know, the current constraints have fueled or have at least shined a magnifying glass on. Think of food service. And if you're a company like 4Foods Group, which is one of our, you know, extraordinarily successful organizations in the state and in the world, where they had a model for in-restaurant dining and most of their properties that all of a sudden in the last 8 weeks has been impossible. And, you know, it was like, again, we curl up in a ball and just say, oh gosh, this is hard, or we change and we modify our approach and we start messaging, hey, we do curbside and we do, you know, pick up. And if you don't have the app, get the app, because this is the best way to do business with us now. And you know, in many of those restaurants, I'm just using this as one example, I didn't have the app. I didn't order ahead. I just, you know, it was lunch or dinner time and I walked in and got a meal. And so that's created a new a new pattern of behavior for us. And I think is just indicative of the kinds of things. So whether it's the way people communicate, you know, recreation, I understand that Peloton exercise bikes are going through the roof. You know, one of our own Rev Road companies, and it had already been successful, but has had an incredible surge of success, has been phone soap, because it actually is efficacious against germs and, you know, viruses and bacteria. And so that's extraordinary. and very fortunate for companies like that. So either you're already well positioned for the newer opportunities and the things that are happening now, or more legacy businesses are trying quickly to see how they can, I don't even know if pivot is the right word, because pivot sort of, connotes a completely new strategy. This feels to me more like delivery mechanisms that have to be accentuated or emphasized. And so if I'm looking around for, new opportunities to start up or to join, I certainly would be thinking about businesses and industries, both those that have already launched and those that have yet to launch, that are going to take advantage. We don't know, right? In the headline news, we don't know if the virus is really going to be gone for good this summer, if it's going to come roaring back next fall. There's all these uncertainties. So it's thinking about what's it been like in the last couple of months and what can we learn and extrapolate from that for the road ahead. I think that will create the opportunities.
I absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think it's all about evolving and recognizing the opportunities that come and changing to show up for those, and to take advantage of those. Glen, you've been a part of several businesses and you've seen incredible success in your career, but what challenges have you seen in the businesses that you've been associated with in the past? How did you overcome those challenges and what lessons did you learn from those?
Well, we don't have enough time on the call. I'm respectful to everybody. Yes, definitely. The slide at the beginning that demonstrated different times and different economic environments is certainly part of that. It seems like every company has both its internal or micro challenges and its external or macro challenges. On internal, at least for me, it's been being part of companies that had some challenges with scaling up. I was fortunate to be part of a software company in the late 90s that grew from 0 to 93 million in 3 years, and opened 11 offices and hired over 800 people. That was extraordinarily stressful and challenging, just the scale of doing that and doing it profitably. Keeping, as you grow and as you evolve, keeping focused on the core vision and what it was, the original pain that you were trying to solve, and your sort of unique or novel or breakthrough invention that is designed to solve that pain. Keeping, as you grow and as you hire new people, keeping focused on that core vision or mission is always a challenge. And then I've seen and been part of, and maybe been guilty of myself at times, feeling perhaps a little too comfortable and not and maybe reacting too slowly to competitive threats. Those were internal ones. External ones, boy, I remember in 2000 and 2001, it was my first time in the CEO chair it was a turnaround company that I began my job 3 weeks before some bad guys flew some jetliners into the tall skyscrapers in New York, and the world experienced 9/11. And for the next year or two, it was a very, very difficult technology sector. Everybody just said, oh my gosh, hold on to what you've got, and a lot shut down. And this particular company had its own challenges, had financial challenges, legal challenges, customer issues that, day in and day out was a grind. I was fortunate about a year and a half later to be able to sell that company and have an acceptable outcome for the investors and the stakeholders. But for my first gig in a CEO role, there were definitely times when I wondered if it was worth it, and if I should throw in the towel, and if the rewards of trying to branch out, stretch myself, acquire some new skills, if it was better just, being a director or a vice president of a department in a bigger company. So these are things, maybe self-doubts and questions that we ask ourselves a lot throughout our careers. But boy, they create incredible lessons to help us and to help those that we work with.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I know during this time, there's a lot of emotional and financial weight as we go through this pandemic. And I've personally felt uplifted through this conversation. So I appreciate that. I would like to open it up for some audience questions now.
Sure.
So let me pull up, we've had a few come in throughout this time. How do you stay positive amidst the trials?
It's a daily, no, it's like an hourly thing to, I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend that there are all kinds of times sometimes when you least expect it, that self-doubt can creep in. And part of the thing, I think, for entrepreneurs, for founders specifically, is to keep reminding ourselves, hey, if what we were trying to do were easy, somebody else would have already done it.
Right.
Or there would already be three great players in the space that I'm entering or whatever. And so we are, in many respects, trying to boldly go where no one has gone before, whatever the product or service is. And so while there are definitely some steps or formulas that I think most successful companies have, you do have to solve a real problem. You do have to have a differentiated product or service that is easy to understand and that people have a good experience with. You have to be able to fuel it with sufficient capital. You have to build and retain a talented and capable team that can execute, that can deliver. And then hopefully, if you do all that, you build a contagious culture and an awesome place to work where people love it. And when you do those things, then the magic happens and special companies result. I've been fortunate to be part of some of those. I won't take any credit for, being the lion's share of the thrust or the emphasis behind those, but I've definitely observed that when that formula is operating and all those steps are in place, companies prosper and things can happen. So believing that can happen with any organization and that success is just around the corner with the next sale, with the next partnership, with the next big press announcement, I think that's what you try to do. And a lot of it's mental and emotional for sure.
I agree. What has been your biggest regret throughout your career?
That I didn't follow my dad. That I didn't follow my dad and be a doctor. No. Well, I don't know if it's regret. I think the constant struggle for me has been the different roles that we all want to play in our lives and partitioning our time and our energy against those roles. So for me, those roles have to do with, husband, father, neighbor, citizen, and business leader and disciple. I mean, there's important roles in there. And there are lots of times when I feel that I'm not doing them well, and all of them or any ones of them. And so trying to parse or partition time and energy, it requires us to be good at planning and requires us to try to focus on things that really matter. There have definitely been times, where I had some big company deliverable, a massively important customer meeting the next morning, and I had to spend some time getting ready. But I just knew that the more important thing at that moment had to do with taking a walk with my teenager or going on a bike ride or something. And so I think my regrets, if I have any, are that I haven't done that as well as I'd like over time. But we're all a work in progress, and it's never too late to get better at that.
Agreed. How do you balance reacting to market conditions with overreacting to market forces? I know it's hard to balance, but do you have any thoughts or rules of thumb?
The best way to not overreact, I think, is to make sure that you have a collaborative decision-making process, at least among the most important leadership choices. If you're an autocrat, you are going to overcorrect, right? I mean, human nature is to overcorrect. We're giant pendulums, always seeking equilibrium, and we always overcorrect. It's just our nature. Yeah. And sometimes, whether it's a board, which for young companies is often your team of initial investors, and then hopefully some independent people, or whether it's a really good collaborative effort on your leadership team. Now, there is a time when you got to stop talking and stop analyzing and make a call. And so there's a lot to be said about going with your gut and instincts and all of that. But I think the biggest way to not overreact, and again, it's easy to personalize it in these times, is to trust one another. You should, as a leadership team, have each other's backs. And if you have a culture where people won't tell you truth because they fear repercussions, they don't like having their head chewed off by you or somebody else, then I'm afraid that's dangerous. I think you have to have, the rules of the game have to be that if we, the leadership team, can express our true feelings and our best ideas, then we're going to make the best choices over time. And so I think that's maybe how I try to balance it.
Okay, we have one more that just came in. Are groups like Corporate Alliance or EO really worth, another one. Are groups like Corporate Alliance or EO really worth the investment?
Yeah. Maybe I can answer it generically instead of specifically, okay? There are definitely some organizations or groups that I think can be helpful. Prior to Silicon Slopes, we had a tech organization in Utah called Utah Technology Council, and those two organizations have combined. And for, I think, 2 or 3 years, I led what was the monthly CEO peer-to-peer forum. And it was a monthly luncheon group of CEOs that just had this purpose. We had one featured presenter each month, but then there was an open discussion about, hey, what are we all going through? What can we learn from each other? How can we help each other? And so how we do that and which ones, I think, need to come down to individual choice and where you see the best value for the time or energy that you're going to invest, and sometimes even some money that you might invest. But I definitely have some affinity groups that I belong to and that I cherish, and that help me both formally and informally to, I don't know, keep the saw sharp, so to speak. Yeah, so I think my answer would be some of them are worth it, but you have to decide that. And so do your homework, talk to others, see what you think.
Ask around, figure it out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for a college student who wants to be an entrepreneur but does not know where to start?
Yeah, I think breadth is kind of always been my thought. My first decade of my official career was in marketing functions, marketing, product management, and then ultimately sales functions prior to more general management roles. And yet my undergrad was in finance and my MBA emphasis was in finance and marketing. And the reason is I always wanted to be the marketeer that understood the numbers and that was comfortable with, balance sheets and profit and loss statements. And whether I did that well or not, others can judge, but that was certainly how I thought about it. So I would suggest that if you want to be an entrepreneur and all you're doing is taking entrepreneur classes, you're not getting a rounded enough education. Study science, work on classes and projects that'll develop analytical thinking and left brain skills. Math, statistics. Almost every organization benefits from people who can think clearly and analytically and can look at problems and solve them and think them through. Even if most of your job utilizes people skills or right brain skills, you can't say enough about good fundamental strategic thinking skills and capabilities. And sometimes our early careers, I have a son that works for one of the premier consulting organizations, and he has a ambitious career plan, which includes graduate school and other things. But right now, he's learning such valuable skill in the projects and the studies and cases that he works on as a consultant that it's invaluable. And I'd kind of say the same thing backing up to college classes. Don't just go down one easy major path because that's what everybody to your left and right is doing. Even when I was focusing on marketing, I took a class in mergers and acquisitions. I took a class in national bank management because I knew I wanted to understand money supply. So breadth is at least what motivates me.
Yeah, being well-versed and making sure you're getting a variety of education in different areas. I agree with that. Important. Well, Glenn, thank you. Before we let you go to now, and also, what is something fun that your success has allowed you to do?
Oh, well, I don't know if my success has allowed it, but I've been blessed to be able to raise 8 kids and have some grandkids. We love the winter sports, so we've been skiers, snowboarders, snowmobilers. We've also, my kids grew up behind a boat, so we love wake surfing and boating. And we have another hobby, which is recreational dirt bikes. So we like some motorcycle riding. Yeah, those have been the things that we've enjoyed that have been some great family bonding time.
That's great. That's great. And what are you up to now?
Yeah, so I run a mad science company called Axcend. I co-founded it a little over 2 years ago with a retired chemistry professor out of Brigham Young named Milton Lee. He's one of the world's foremost authorities in a part of analytical science known as chromatography. And we've brought to market a small, portable, kind of disruptive lab instrument that's starting to gain some traction. It's early. We have about 20 team members. And but high hopes, high expectations, and it's a new realm for me, so I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
That's great. Well, we're excited for you. That sounds like an exciting project. Keep us posted, keep us updated on how it's going. We are going to turn the time back over to AJ to close out the event. But Glenn, thank you so much. We're grateful for you, and this is really, really a great thing.
My pleasure. Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.